The radiator hissed like a dying snake, metal groaning against metal in a rhythm Maya had forgotten existed. She opened her eyes to water-stained ceiling tiles, their brown rings forming continents she used to trace while lying in bed on Sunday mornings. The smell hit her next. Mildew and old cooking grease, the particular perfume of pre-war buildings in Manhattan before gentrification scrubbed them clean. Her hand touched cotton sheets, the cheap kind that pill after 3 washes. Not the Egyptian sateen she'd bought after the promotion. Not the... Maya sat up so fast the room tilted, her palm pressed against her chest, feeling for the scar from the surgery. Smooth skin, no ridge of raised tissue. Her breathing came shallow and quick. The window across from the bed framed a fire escape caked in pigeon shit. And beyond that, the brick wall of the building next door, close enough to touch if she leaned out far enough. She knew that wall, knew the graffiti tag in the corner that read, "Sane," in bubble letters, knew the window on the 4th floor where Mrs. Chen hung her laundry every Tuesday. But she shouldn't know these things. Not anymore. Maya's feet hit the floor, scuffed hardwood that she'd always meant to refinish. She walked to the mirror hanging crooked above the dresser, the frame held together with duct tape. The face that looked back at her was younger by decades. No crow's feet bracketing her eyes, no silver threading through her black hair, no permanent crease between her eyebrows from years of frowning at spreadsheets. This was her face at 28, the face she'd worn when the sound of a toilet flushing next door made her jump. She could hear everything through these walls. The Johnsons fighting about money, the college student upstairs playing the same Nirvana album on repeat, the baby in 3B crying at 2 in the morning. She crossed to the window, pressed her forehead against the cold glass. The street below looked wrong in its rightness. Yellow cabs that were actually yellow, not the faded jaundiced color she remembered. A bodega on the corner with a green awning that would be gone in 5 years, replaced by a Starbucks. People walking past in baggy jeans and oversized flannel shirts. Fashion she'd seen cycle back into style before disappearing again. The calendar on the wall stopped her heart. September 1995. Maya's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, the impact jarring her spine. September 1995. She was 28 years old. Living in a rent-stabilized 1-bedroom on the Upper West Side, working as a junior analyst at a firm that would collapse in the 2008 crash. And in 3 weeks, representatives from the building's owner would knock on every door with an offer. They would offer cash for deed, $50,000 for each tenant to sign away their rent-stabilized lease and vacate within 60 days. Most people in the building would take it. It seemed like so much money back then. $50,000 when rent was $643 a month. Maya had taken it. She'd taken the money and moved to a studio in Astoria, told herself it was temporary, that she'd save up and buy her own place eventually. She'd watched from afar as the building went co-op, as the units sold for $200,000, then $400,000, then more. She'd watched her old apartment, this apartment, list for $750,000 15 years later. $50,000 for an apartment that would be worth $750,000. The worst financial decision of her life. And now she was here, 3 weeks before that knock on the door, living it again. Maya didn't leave the apartment for 2 days. She cataloged everything, touching objects like talismans. The coffee maker with the crack in the carafe that dripped onto the counter, the couch she'd bought at a stoop sale for $75, its springs visible through worn upholstery, the small television that only got 3 channels clearly, the radio alarm clock that woke her every morning at 6:15 with static-filled NPR. She opened the refrigerator, half a carton of milk that would expire in 4 days, leftover Chinese food in white containers with wire handles, a 6-pack of Zima with 2 bottles missing. She'd forgotten about Zima, forgotten the taste of it, sweet and vaguely medicinal. In the bedroom closet, she found clothes that had been in style once and would be again. High-waisted jeans, crop tops, a velvet choker she'd worn to clubs in the East Village, dancing until 3 in the morning in pacesements that smelled like sweat and spilled beer. The tag still attached to a dress she'd bought for a date that never happened. Her past self's life laid out like a museum exhibit. On the 3rd day, hunger drove her outside. The air hit different in September 1995. Cleaner somehow, despite the garbage smell from the alley beside her building. Less electronic. She could hear individual sounds, a car horn, a dog barking. So, someone practicing scales on a violin, instead of the white noise roar the city would become. She walked to the bodega on the corner, the one with the green awning. The bell over the door chimed as she entered. The owner, Carlos, she remembered his name was Carlos, looked up from the lottery tickets he was arranging behind the counter. "Morning, Maya," he said, his accent thick with the Bronx. "You okay? Haven't seen you in a few days." She'd forgotten this too. The way people noticed in neighborhoods, before everyone moved every 2 years chasing cheaper rent or better opportunities, the way the bodega owner knew your name, your usual order, whether you'd been sick. "Just busy with work," she heard herself say. "You want the usual? Coffee, light and sweet, everything bagel with cream cheese?" She nodded. She watching him move through the familiar routine. The coffee from the machine in the back corner, 3 sugars, enough milk to turn it beige, the bagel from the basket by the register, already going stale by noon, but still good enough. He sliced it with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, spread cream cheese thick across both halves, wrapped it in wax paper. $3.50, he said. $3.50. Maya reached into her pocket, pulled out a worn leather wallet. Inside, bills that looked fake in their outdatedness. She handed over a 5, took the change. Outside, she sat on the stoop of her building and ate slowly, tasting everything. The bagel was better than she remembered. Or maybe she'd forgotten what real New York bagels tasted like before every city tried to replicate them. The coffee burned her tongue the same way it always had. Across the street, Mrs. Kowalski was setting up her newsstand. In 10 years, she'd be gone, replaced by a dog walker who charged $30 an hour. In 20 years, the whole block would be designer boutiques and artisanal ice cream shops. But now, in this moment, Mrs. Kowalski arranged magazines with gnarled hands, shouting at teenagers who tried to read without buying. "Maya Chen?" She looked up. A woman stood on the sidewalk, smartly dressed in a navy suit with shoulder pads that were just starting to go out of style. Her hair was cut in a severe bob, and she carried a leather briefcase. "Yes?" "I'm Jennifer Walsh with Cartwright Properties. Do you have a moment to talk about an exciting opportunity regarding your building?" 3 weeks early. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. In her memory, the representatives had come in late September, knocked on doors in the evening when people were home from work. This was the 2nd week of September, barely 9 in the morning. "I'm sorry," Maya said, standing up. "I'm actually running late for work. I could come back. This really is an opportunity you won't want to miss. We're offering cash payments to tenants in exchange for—" "I know what you're offering," Maya said, the words coming out sharper than intended. "And I'm not interested." Jennifer Walsh's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Perhaps you don't understand the full scope of—" "I understand perfectly. You want to buy out rent-stabilized tenants so you can convert the building to condos and sell the units at market rate." "I'm not interested." The smile finally cracked. "How did you—" "Have a good day, Miss Walsh." Maya walked back into her building, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the lock. Behind her, she heard Jennifer Walsh call out something about coming back with a better offer, but the door had already closed. The phone rang at noon. Maya stared at it. A beige rotary phone she'd inherited from her grandmother, its cord tangled into impossible knots. She let it ring 7 times before picking up. "Hello?" "Maya, it's Diane," her boss. Maya's stomach clenched. She'd forgotten she was supposed to be at work. In her previous life, her old life, her future life, she'd called in sick these days, burning through vacation time she couldn't afford to lose. "I'm so sorry," Maya started, but Diane cut her off. "Are you okay?" "What? You sound strange." "I'm fine, just a stomach bug. I'll be in tomorrow." "Take the time you need. But Maya," Diane's voice softened. "Is everything all right? You've seemed distracted lately." "Distracted?" Right. In the weeks before the buyout offer, Maya had been distracted. She'd been dating someone. Daniel? David, who'd turned out to be married. She'd been worried about money. Always worried about money. $643 a month for rent seemed reasonable until you factored in student loans and credit card debt and the cost of trying to look professional enough for a job that barely paid $32,000 a year. "Everything's fine," Maya lied. "I'll see you tomorrow." She hung up before Diane could ask more questions. The apartment was too quiet. In her old life, her first life, she'd filled the silence with television, with music, with anything to avoid being alone with her thoughts. Now the silence felt precious, like something that might shatter if she breathed too hard. She made a list. The list was something she'd learned in therapy, decades from now. When the panic got too bad, when the weight of decisions crushed down, you made a list. You wrote down everything you knew, everything you needed to do, everything you could control. Things I know for certain. It's September 1995. I'm 28 years old. I live at 247 West 82nd Street, apartment 4C. In my previous life, I took a $50,000 buyout and left. The building went co-op. My apartment sold for $750,000 in 2010. I lived with that regret for 25 years. Things I don't know. How this happened, if this is real, if I can change things. What else might change if I do things I need to do? Don't take the buyout. Keep my job. Figure out how to afford the co-op purchase price when the conversion happens. Avoid making the same mistakes. The last one was hardest. What were her mistakes? Taking the buyout, obviously, but before that, dating the wrong people, staying in a job that didn't value her, being too afraid to ask for what she deserved. Maya looked around the apartment with new eyes. In her first life, she'd seen it as temporary, a stepping stone to something better. She'd never hung pictures on the walls because she was always planning to move. Nia never invested in real furniture because why bother for a rental? Never made it home because she thought home was something that happened later, somewhere else, when she had more money and more time and more life figured out. She'd been 28 years old and treating her life like a dress rehearsal. Not this time. Maya went to work the next day in clothes that felt like a costume from a period drama. Her navy blazer had shoulder pads, her skirt hit below the knee, her shoes, sensible pumps with a modest heel, pinched her toes in a way she'd forgotten feet could hurt. The subway was different too. Graffitied cars with torn vinyl seats, the smell of piss and hot metal. A breakdancer performing between stops, his boombox blaring music that would be nostalgic in 20 years, but just sounded loud now. She got off at Wall Street, emerged into a canyon of buildings that hadn't yet become symbols of financial collapse. The firm where she worked occupied 3 floors of an older building, the kind with marble lobbies and brass elevators that required operators. "Good morning, Miss Chen," the operator said. His name was Albert, and he'd worked there for 30 years before retiring in 2002. She'd gone to his retirement party, brought a card that everyone signed. "Good morning, Albert." The elevator rose with a mechanical groan. 3rd floor, the doors opened to a reception area that looked like every movie about the 90s. Potted ferns, impressionist prints, furniture in shades of mauve and teal. Maya's cubicle was in the back, one of 12 identical spaces separated by fabric partitions. Her computer was the size of a small television, its screen glowing an acidic green. A stack of reports waited on her desk, each one requiring analysis that would take hours of manual calculation because the software was so limited. "You're alive," said a voice behind her. Maya turned. Rachel stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee from the Starbucks that would close in 3 years when the rent tripled. Rachel was her work friend, the person she ate lunch with and complained to about their boss, and shared cigarettes with on the fire escape, even though neither of them really smoked. Rachel, who had moved to Seattle in 1998 for a job at Microsoft and sent Christmas cards for a few years before falling out of touch. "I'm alive," Maya confirmed, taking the offered coffee. "Stomach bug?" "Something like that." Rachel settled against the edge of Maya's desk. She was wearing high-waisted jeans and a fitted blazer, her hair in a style that required considerable effort with a curling iron. "So, did you hear?" "Hear what?" "About your building. Lisa in accounting lives on 87th, and she said there are rumors going around that the landlords are trying to push out rent-stabilized tenants, offering cash buyouts." Word traveled fast, or maybe it had always traveled this fast, and Maya had just forgotten what it was like to live in a neighborhood where people talked, where gossip moved faster than internet. "Someone approached me yesterday," Maya said carefully. "I said no." Rachel's eyes widened. "How much did they offer?" She didn't get that far, but I've heard it might be around $50,000. $50,000! Rachel's voice rose loud enough that people in nearby cubicles looked over. She lowered it to a hiss. "Maya, that's more than you make in 2 years. You could pay off your student loans. I could give up an apartment that's worth 10 times that much." "What are you talking about? It's a rental." "For now, but if they're pushing out tenants, it means they're converting to co-op. When they do, I'll have insider purchase rights. I can buy my apartment for probably 30–40% below market value. And in this neighborhood, Maya gestured toward the window, toward the Manhattan skyline that was already glittering with money. Property values only go up. Rachel stared at her like she'd started speaking in tongues. Since when do you know anything about real estate? Since I lived through it, Maya didn't say. Since I spent 25 years watching the city transform, watching people who bought become millionaires, while people who rented fell further behind. Since I died at 53 in a hospital bed, drowning in medical debt because I'd never built equity, never had anything to fall back on. I've been doing research, Maya said instead. Research. Rachel's tone made it clear what she thought about that. Maya, you can barely afford to eat out. How are you going to afford to buy an apartment in Manhattan? It was a good question. In her previous life, Maya hadn't been able to afford it. That was part of why she'd taken the buyout. The math seemed impossible. Even with insider purchase rights, even with a discounted price, she'd needed a down payment she didn't have and a salary that could support a mortgage. But Maya knew things now that she hadn't known then. She knew which stocks would boom. She knew which companies would survive the dot-com crash. She knew that a junior analyst at a mid-sized investment firm could, with the right knowledge, turn a small amount of money into a considerable amount. I'll figure it out, Maya said. Rachel shook her head, but she was smiling. You're crazy, but I guess that's why I like you. She glanced at her watch. Shit, I'm late for a meeting. Lunch later? Definitely. After Rachel left, Maya turned to her computer. The green screen blinked with a cursor, waiting. She had work to do, reports to analyze, numbers to crunch. But beneath that, she had a larger project. She needed to make money. Enough money to buy her apartment when the building went co-op. Enough money to secure the future she'd lost. And she had exactly one advantage. She knew what was coming. The Wall Street of 1995 wasn't the algorithmic trading, high-frequency, microsecond reaction marketplace it would become. It was still a place where humans made decisions, where timing and research and calculated risks could pay off for someone with the right information. Maya had the right information. She also had $743 in her savings account. At lunch, she walked to a payphone, something that would seem absurd in 20 years, but was completely normal now, and called a number she'd memorized before leaving her apartment. Schwab, this is Dennis speaking. Hi, I'd like to open a trading account. The process was surprisingly simple. Dennis asked for her information, confirmed she understood the risks, explained the fees. Within 20 minutes, Maya had an account number and instructions for transferring funds. $743 minus the minimum opening balance of $500 left her with $243 in checking until her next paycheck. She should have felt terrified. Instead, she felt calm. She knew things. She knew that in November, Netscape would go public and triple in value on the first day of trading. She knew that a small company called Amazon, which had just launched in July, would be worth betting on despite everyone saying online bookstores made no sense. She knew that Microsoft was about to release Windows 95, and while the stock wouldn't explode immediately, it would grow steadily for years. She couldn't invest in everything. $743 wasn't enough for that. But she could make strategic choices, small bets that would compound over time. Maya walked back to the office with her head full of numbers and timelines. She had 2 months until Netscape's IPO, 2 months to save every penny she could to maximize what she'd have available to invest. Rachel was waiting at her desk, holding a takeout bag that smelled like Thai food. "Pad see you," she announced. "Your favorite?" They ate at Maya's desk, Rachel talking about her weekend, about the guy she was seeing who maybe wasn't that into her, about her sister's upcoming wedding. Maya listened with the strange double consciousness of someone who'd heard these stories before, who knew how they'd end. Rachel's relationship would fizzle out. Her sister's marriage would last 18 months before a messy divorce. Rachel herself would meet someone in Seattle, someone kind and stable, and they'd have 2 children and a house with a yard. But Rachel didn't know any of that yet. She was 26 years old, still figuring things out, still making mistakes that seemed catastrophic but would barely register as memories 20 years later. "Are you even listening to me?" Rachel asked. "Sorry, long day. It's 1 PM. "Long week, then." Rachel studied her with the kind of attention Maya had forgotten friends could give, before everyone got too busy, too distracted, too consumed by the constant connectivity of phones and emails and messages that demanded immediate responses. "Something's different about you," Rachel said. "Different how?" "I don't know. You seem older somehow. Oh, like you figured something out that the rest of us are still struggling with." Maya's throat tightened. "I'm the same person I was last week." "Are you, though?" Rachel's expression was unreadable. "Because last week, you were freaking out about whether David was going to call you back. And now you're turning down $50,000 and talking about real estate investment like you're some kind of financial guru." David? That was his name, the married man Maya had wasted 3 months dating, who'd promised to leave his wife and never did. She'd cried over him for weeks, eaten ice cream in bed, questioned her worth and desirability. It seemed impossibly distant now, like something that had happened to someone else entirely. "David's not going to call me back," Maya said. "And I'm okay with that." "Since when?" "Since I lived another 25 years and learned that the men who don't call back are doing you a favor. Since I realized that crying over someone who lies to you is wasting tears that could be spent on literally anything else. Since I decided to focus on things I can actually control," Maya said instead. Rachel was quiet for a moment, picking at her noodles. Finally, she said, "I think maybe I should try that too." "Yeah?" "Yeah, I'm tired of waiting for assholes to decide I'm worth their time." She smiled, but it looked sad around the edges. "Want to go out this weekend? There's a new club in the East Village. We could dance, drink too much, remember what it's like to have fun." Maya almost said no. She needed to save money, needed to focus, needed to prepare for everything coming. But Rachel was looking at her with hope in her eyes, and Maya remembered something else from her previous life. She'd said no too many times. Turned down invitations because she was too tired, too broke, too worried about tomorrow, and eventually people stopped asking. "Okay," Maya said, "but you're buying the first round." "Deal." The weekend came wrapped in the particular magic of New York in early fall. The air had cooled just enough to make walking pleasant, and the city seemed to exhale after the oppressive humidity of summer. Maya stood in front of her closet, staring at clothes that should have been familiar but felt like artifacts from an archaeological dig. Rachel had said to dress up. In 1995, that meant something specific. Platform shoes, a slip dress over a t-shirt, maybe a choker, definitely dark lipstick. Then Maya pulled out a black dress she barely remembered owning, added a vintage cardigan she'd bought at a thrift shop, slipped on shoes that would destroy her feet by the end of the night. She looked in the mirror and saw a stranger wearing her face. The phone rang. Rachel calling from the lobby because cell phones still cost a fortune and nobody texted yet. "I'll be right down," Maya said. The club was in the East Village, in a basement that had probably been storage for a restaurant above it. The line stretched around the corner, full of people who looked impossibly young. Maya realized with a jolt that she was impossibly young too. 28. In her previous life, she'd felt old at 28, like she'd already missed all her chances. Now, at 53 memories and 28 years, she felt ancient and newborn at the same time. "I know the doorman," Rachel said, pulling her past the line. "Come on." Inside, the music hit like a physical force. Maya's ears rang with bass so deep it vibrated in her chest. The air was thick with sweat and smoke and spilled beer. Bodies pressed together on a dance floor lit by strobes that turned motion into stop-motion animation. Rachel shouted something Maya couldn't hear over the music, then disappeared toward the bar. Maya stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching people move. She'd forgotten this, the pure physicality of going out before everyone had phones to stare at, before dance floors became Instagram opportunities. People just danced unselfconsciously without performing for an audience that wasn't there. Rachel returned with 2 beers in plastic cups. She thrust one at Maya. "To bad decisions," Rachel yelled. They clinked cups, drank. The beer was cheap and warm and perfect. Someone bumped into Maya from behind, apologizing without stopping their momentum toward the dance floor. Rachel grabbed her hand, pulled her into the crowd, and then they were dancing, surrounded by strangers who became temporary friends in the way only drunk people in clubs could manage. Maya let herself get lost in it. The music, the movement, the moment. She danced like nobody was watching, because in 1995, nobody was. No cameras, no social media, no permanent record of every night out. Just bodies and sound and the fleeting now. At some point, a guy started dancing near them. Early 30s, good-looking in an unremarkable way, dressed in clothes that tried too hard. He smiled at Maya, and she smiled back without meaning it, and he took that as an invitation to move closer. "I'm Nick," he shouted over the music. "Maya." You come here often? It was such a cliche line that Maya almost laughed. In her previous life, she might have given this guy a chance. Might have danced with him, given him her number, gone on a few dates before realizing they had nothing in common. Not tonight. "I'm here with my friend," she said, gesturing to Rachel. "I could buy you both a drink?" "We're good, thanks." His smile dimmed. "Come on, don't be like that." "Like what? Uninterested?" Maya's voice came out sharper than intended. "Bitchy," he said, and turned away. Rachel, who'd been watching the exchange, stepped closer. "You okay?" "Fine." Maya realized she was shaking, but not from fear or anger, from something else. From the recognition that she didn't have to accept attention she didn't want, didn't have to be polite to men who called her bitchy for saying no, didn't have to waste time on people who made her feel small. She'd learned these lessons the hard way, over decades of bad relationships and worse decisions, and now she got to skip all that to arrive at self-respect without the scars. "Let's get another drink," Rachel said. They pushed through the crowd toward the bar. The bartender, a woman with purple hair and multiple facial piercings, took their order. While they waited, Maya looked around the club with new eyes. These people, she thought, these beautiful, stupid, hopeful people dancing in a basement in the East Village, they had no idea what was coming. No idea about the dot-com crash, or 9/11s, or the housing crisis, or the pandemic that would lock down the world. They were dancing in the last moment before the future arrived and changed everything. "You're crying," Rachel said. Maya touched her face, surprised to find it wet. "I'm just drunk. We've only had 2 beers. I'm a lightweight." Rachel didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. They took their drinks back to the dance floor, lost themselves in the music again. Maya danced until her feet hurt, and her throat was raw from shouting along to songs she'd forgotten she knew. She danced like it mattered, like this moment was real and important and worth remembering, because it was. At 2 a.m, they stumbled out onto the street. The air felt impossibly cold after the heat of the club. Rachel lit a cigarette. She'd quit in 1997, Maya remembered, but after a health scare that turned out to be nothing, and offered one to Maya. "I don't smoke," Maya said. "Since when? You literally smoked with me last week." Right. In her previous life, Maya had smoked socially until her early 30s, quit and restarted twice, finally given it up for good when the cost became prohibitive. She'd forgotten that at 28, she still carried a pack in her purse for nights like this. "I'm trying to quit," she said. "Good for you." Rachel took a long drag, blew smoke into the night air. "I should too, but not tonight." They walked toward the subway, heels clicking on pavement. The city was never truly quiet, even at 2 a.m. Somewhere, a car alarm wailed. A delivery truck rumbled past. 2 men argued in Spanish outside a bodega, their voices rising and falling like music. I had fun tonight," Rachel said. "We should do this more often." "We should," Maya agreed, knowing they wouldn't. In her previous timeline, they'd gone out a few more times, but life had a way of getting in the way. Work, relationships, exhaustion. The friendship had faded not because they stopped caring, but because maintaining connections took effort they couldn't seem to find. But maybe this time could be different. At the subway entrance, they hugged goodbye. Rachel headed downtown, Maya uptown. The subway platform was nearly empty. Just a homeless man sleeping on a bench and 2 teenagers making out against a pillar. Maya sat on a bench, her feet screaming relief. The platform smelled like urine and hot metal, and that indefinable subway smell that every New Yorker knew intimately. She should have felt disgusted. Instead, she felt nostalgic. The train arrived with a screech of metal on metal. Maya got on, found a seat near the door. The car was covered in graffiti, tags layered over tags, a palimpsest of vandalism. In 10 years, the MTA would clean all this up. In 20 years, the trains would be cleaner than they'd been in half a century. But now, it was still dirty and dangerous and perfect. Maya closed her eyes, let the rocking of the train lull her into a daze. She thought about the club, about dancing, about the guy who'd called her bitchy for saying no. She thought about Rachel, young and hopeful and unaware that her life would turn out just fine. She thought about her apartment, waiting for her at the end of the line. The apartment she was going to keep this time. No matter what, Monday morning came too early and too bright. Maya dragged herself out of bed, showered in water pressure that barely qualified as a trickle, dressed in her work uniform of conservative blazer and modest skirt. At the office, she went through the motions of her job, analyzing reports, inputting data, attending meetings where men her age were taken seriously, and she was expected to take notes. She'd forgotten how casual the sexism was in 1995, how unremarkable it seemed for her boss to ask her to get coffee while asking her male colleague to present the analysis Maya had actually done. In her previous life, she'd swallowed her frustration, told herself it would get better if she just worked hard enough, proved herself worthy. It had taken another decade for things to change, and even then, not enough. This time, when her boss, Richard, a man who would be forced into early retirement after a harassment complaint in 2003, asked her to get coffee during a meeting, Maya met his eyes and said, "I'll get my own coffee during the break. Right now, I'd like to present my analysis of the Q3 projections." The room went silent. Richard's face flushed red. The three other men at the table looked anywhere but at Maya. "Excuse me?" Richard said. "The analysis you asked for. Would you like me to present it now or after the break?" She could see him calculating, trying to decide how to respond. If he pushed back too hard, he'd look petty. If he let it slide, he'd lose face. "After the break," he said finally. "We're running behind schedule." Maya smiled. "Of course." At lunch, Rachel pulled her aside. "Are you trying to get fired?" "I'm trying to do my job." "By pissing off Richard?" "Maya, he controls your performance reviews, your raises, your entire career trajectory at this firm." "Then maybe I need to work somewhere else." Rachel stared at her like she'd sprouted a second head. "You're serious." "I'm serious." "But you love this job. Did she?" Maya tried to remember. In her previous life, she'd stayed at this firm for 5 years, slowly burning out, slowly accepting that she'd never advance past a certain level. She'd loved the idea of the job, working in finance, being part of the machinery of money, but the reality had been soul-crushing. "I loved the idea of this job," Maya said, "but the reality is that I'm 28 years old. I'm smarter than half the guys who get promoted over me, and I'm tired of pretending that's okay." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What happened to you?" "What do you mean?" "You're different. I don't know how to explain it, but you're like you woke up one day and decided you didn't have to take anyone's shit anymore." "Maybe I did." "Well, it's terrifying and kind of amazing." Rachel smiled. "But seriously, be careful. Richard's not a good enemy to have." Maya knew Rachel was right. In a rational world, she'd keep her head down, play the game, wait for her moment. But she didn't have time for that. Not anymore. She needed to make money, needed to position herself for opportunities, needed to build the foundation for a future that wouldn't crumble the way her previous life had. That afternoon, she presented her analysis. She spoke clearly, made eye contact, didn't apologize or caveat or soften her conclusions. The numbers were solid. Her projections were accurate, and when Richard tried to poke holes in her methodology, she defended her work without backing down. After the meeting, Diane pulled her aside. "That was impressive," Diane said. "Risky, but impressive." "Thank you." "Richard's going to make your life difficult?" "I know." Diane studied her with those sharp eyes that never missed anything. "You're planning to leave, aren't you?" Maya considered lying, decided against it. "Eventually, but not yet." "Good, because I'd like to make you an offer." Diane glanced around, lowered her voice. "I'm starting my own consulting firm. Small, boutique, focused on portfolio analysis for individual clients. I need someone smart, someone who can think independently. Interested?" In her previous life, Diane had started her consulting firm in 1996. Just Maya had never known about it, had never been invited to join. By the time she found out, Diane's firm was successful and fully staffed, and Maya was still at the same company, still grinding away for people who didn't value her. "Very interested," Maya said. "It won't pay much at first. Maybe $35,000 to start with the potential for more as we grow. But you'd have equity, 5% of the company." $35,000 was barely more than she made now. But 5% of a company that would, Maya remembered, be worth several million by 2005. "I'm in," Maya said. Diane smiled. "Good. I'll need you to start in January. That gives you a few months to wrap up here. And Maya?" She paused. "Don't burn any bridges. You never know when you'll need to cross them again." Maya nodded, but she was already calculating. 3 months until January, 3 months to save every penny, to invest carefully, to build the financial foundation she'd need, and then a new job with equity in a company that would succeed. Things were falling into place. That night, Maya sat at her kitchen table with a notebook and a calculator. The notebook was spiral-bound, the kind college students used, with a cardboard cover that was already bending at the corners. The calculator was the size of a sandwich, solar-powered, prone to glitching when clouds passed overhead. She wrote numbers in neat columns. Current savings, $243 paycheck after taxes, $1,875 every 2 weeks. Rent, $643/month student loans, $240/month utilities, $80/month. Food, $200/month transportation, $100/month subway. Remaining, $512/month. In 3 months, she could save roughly $1,500. Add that to the $243 already in her account, and she'd have less than $2,000 to invest when Netscape went public in November. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Maya chewed the end of her pen, thinking. She needed to cut expenses. Food was the obvious target. She could eat ramen, skip takeout, brown bag lunch every day. That might save another $100 per month. Transportation was fixed unless she wanted to walk everywhere, which wasn't practical. Utilities couldn't be reduced much. What about additional income? In her previous life, Maya had occasionally done freelance financial analysis, helping small businesses with their books. It was tedious work, poorly paid, but it was income. She could do that again, or she could do something smarter. Maya looked at the calendar on her wall. October, November, December, 3 months until her new job started. 3 months that, in her previous life, she'd mostly wasted wallowing over David and dreading the buyout decision. She picked up the phone, dialed a number from memory. Hello? A man's voice, cautious because nobody called at 9 p.m. unless it was important or they were selling something. Hi, this is Maya Chen. I'm looking for tutoring students. I specialize in math and economics, SAT prep, that kind of thing. Do you know anyone who might be interested? The man, a neighbor from the 3rd floor whose son had been struggling with calculus, perked up. Actually, yes. How much do you charge? $30 an hour. In her previous timeline, she'd charged $20, but inflation existed, and Maya knew her worth now. That's steep, the man said. I guarantee results. Oh, if your son doesn't improve by at least 1 letter grade, I'll refund half the cost. A pause. When can you start? By the end of the week, Maya had 4 tutoring students. She tutored in the evenings, after work, turning her living room into a classroom. 2 high school students struggling with math, 1 college freshman who needed help with economics, 1 adult learner preparing for the GMAT. $30 an hour, 5 hours a week, an extra $600 a month. It was exhausting. Maya would get home from work at 6, eat something quick, then tutor from 7 to 10. But when she held her paycheck from the tutoring, actual cash, because people still paid in cash, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Power. November arrived with a cold snap that made the radiators in Maya's building work overtime, clanging and hissing like dying industrial equipment. The windows developed condensation overnight, frost patterns that looked almost beautiful if you squinted. Maya woke before dawn on the day of Netscape's IPO. She'd called in sick to work, couldn't risk missing this. Her hands shook as she dialed her broker. Schwab, this is Dennis. Hi, it's Maya Chen. I want to place an order for the Netscape IPO. Everyone does, Miss Chen. How many shares are you looking to purchase? She'd done the math 100 times. Netscape was expected to open at $28 per share. She had $3,200 in her account. If she went all in, she could buy roughly 114 shares. In her previous life, she'd sat on the sidelines, convinced the IPO was overhyped, that internet companies were a bubble. She'd watched Netscape triple on opening day and told herself she'd been right to be cautious. But Maya knew what came next. Netscape would peak, crash with the dot-com bubble, be acquired by AOL. The trick was timing. Get in early, get out before the crash. 100 shares, Maya said. That's $2,800 at the expected opening price. Are you sure? I'm sure. All right, I'll place the order, but Miss Chen, I have to tell you, IPOs are risky, especially for companies that have never turned a profit. You could lose everything. I understand, she hung up, her heart racing. $2,800, nearly all her savings. If this went wrong, she'd be back to zero, with nothing to show for months of work. But it wouldn't go wrong. She knew it wouldn't. Maya spent the day pacing her apartment, unable to focus on anything. She turned on the television, flipped between channels, all of them carrying news about the IPO. Netscape, the company that made the web browser everyone used. Netscape, the symbol of the internet revolution. Netscape, the biggest IPO in Wall Street history. At 4 p.m., her phone rang. "Miss Chen, it's Dennis. I wanted to give you an update on your Netscape shares." "Yes?" "They opened at $71 per share." Maya's knees went weak. $71? More than double the expected price. "Your 100 shares are currently worth $7,100. That's a profit of approximately $4,300. $4,300 in one day. Miss Chen, are you still there?" "I'm here." "What would you like to do?" "Some investors are selling now, need taking their profits. Others are holding, betting the price will keep rising." Maya closed her eyes, thinking. In her previous timeline, Netscape had peaked around $170 before beginning its long decline, but that peak came later, after months of volatility. "Sell half," Maya said. 50 shares, keep the other 50. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She hung up and sat down hard on her couch. $3,550 in profit from 50 shares. Add the original $3,200, and she had close to $7,000. Plus the 50 shares she'd kept, currently worth another $3,500. $10,000 in total value from an investment made that morning. Maya started laughing. It bubbled up from somewhere deep, unstoppable. She laughed until tears streamed down her face, until her sides hurt, until she couldn't breathe. This was real. This was actually happening. She'd gone back in time, and she was making it count. The knock on Maya's door came on a Tuesday evening in late November, just as she was finishing a tutoring session with Marcus, the college freshman struggling with microeconomics. "That's all for tonight," she told him. "Next week, we'll cover perfect competition and monopolies." Marcus packed up his books. "Thanks, Maya. I actually understand this stuff now." "That's what I'm here for." After he left, Maya opened the door to find Jennifer Walsh standing in the hallway. The real estate agent looked less polished than during their first encounter. Her suit was wrinkled, and her severe bob showed signs of humidity frizz. "Miss Chen?" she said. "I'm glad I caught you." "Miss Walsh, I thought I made my position clear." "You did, but I wanted to present you with our revised offer." She pulled a folder from her briefcase. "We're now offering $75,000 for tenants who sign by the end of December." $75,000. $25,000 more than the original offer. In her previous life, this was the number that had broken her resistance. $75,000 when she was drowning in student debt, when she made $32,000 a year, when the idea of owning property seemed impossibly distant. "No," Maya said. Jennifer Walsh's professional smile flickered. "Miss Chen, with all due respect, this is an extremely generous offer. You're in a rent-stabilized apartment paying $643 a month. But you could take this money, invest it, buy a property somewhere else." "Somewhere else," Maya repeated. "You mean somewhere not Manhattan?" "Well, yes. Property in Manhattan is expensive. But in Queens or even Brooklyn, I like my apartment. I like my neighborhood. I like being able to walk to Central Park and the subway and my favorite coffee shop. Why would I give that up?" $75,000, Jennifer Walsh said, as if repeating the number would make it more persuasive, "is not enough money to give up a rent-stabilized apartment in Manhattan that will only increase in value." "You're very confident in the market." "I'm confident in mathematics. This neighborhood is gentrifying. Property values are rising. If I give up my lease now, I'll never be able to afford to live here again." Jennifer Walsh studied her with sharp eyes. "You seem to know a lot about real estate for someone who works in finance." "I know enough." "Well," the agent closed her folder with a snap. "The offer stands until December 31st. If you change your mind—" "I won't." After the door closed, Maya leaned against it, her heart pounding. $75,000. God, it was tempting. With that money, she could pay off her student loans entirely, could invest aggressively, could build a cushion that would make her feel secure. But security wasn't the same as wealth. Security was playing it safe. Wealth was taking calculated risks. Maya walked to her window, looked out at the street below. A light snow had started to fall, the first of the season, dusting the sidewalks with white. People hurried past, collars turned up against the cold. The bodega's green awning sagged under the weight of accumulating snow. In 20 years, this view would be unrecognizable, but the bones of it, the buildings, the street layout, the essential character of the neighborhood would remain. And she'd be here to see it, to be part of it, to own a piece of it. The phone rang. Maya answered without checking who was calling. "It's done," Diane's voice said. "I signed the lease today. We're official." "Congratulations!" "I wanted to confirm, you're still planning to start in January?" "Absolutely." "Good, because I just signed our first client, a tech entrepreneur who sold his company and needs help managing the windfall. It's exactly the kind of client we want. Smart, forward-thinking, willing to take risks." Maya smiled. "Sounds perfect." "It is. And Maya, I have a good feeling about this. Ooh, about us. I think we're going to build something really special." After hanging up, Maya made herself tea, the cheap kind that came in bags, nothing fancy. She sat on her worn couch, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days, and looked around her apartment. It wasn't much. Water stains on the ceiling, scuffed floors, a radiator that clanged like a percussion instrument, thin walls that let her hear her neighbors' entire lives. But it was hers. And soon, it would be legally, permanently hers. December unfolded in a blur of work and tutoring and careful financial maneuvering. Maya tracked her Netscape shares obsessively, watching as they climbed toward $100, then $120, then $150. She sold in tranches, taking profits while keeping enough skin in the game to benefit if the price continued rising. By Christmas, her portfolio was worth $32,000. $32,000 from an initial investment of $3,200, a tenfold return in 2 months. She sat at her kitchen table on Christmas Eve, staring at the statement her broker had sent. The numbers looked fake, like someone had added an extra zero by mistake. But they were real. She'd actually done this. Maya's phone rang, her mother calling from California. "Merry Christmas, sweetie." "Merry Christmas, Mom. How are you? Are you eating enough? Your father and I worry about you out there all alone." Maya smiled. Her mother worried about everything, whether Maya was eating enough, sleeping enough, dating enough, saving enough. In her previous life, Maya had found these calls suffocating. Now they felt precious. "I'm fine, Mom. Better than fine, actually. I got a new job." "A new job? But I thought you liked working in finance." "I do. This is still finance, just a different company. A startup consulting firm. It's risky, but it could really pay off." Her mother made a worried sound. "Risky? Maya, you need stability. You need benefits. What if something happens?" What if something happens? That had been the refrain of Maya's previous life. What if you get sick? What if you lose your job? What if the market crashes? What if fear masquerading as prudence? "I'll be okay, Mom, I promise. You always say that, and I always am." They talked for another 20 minutes, her mother sharing news about relatives Maya barely remembered, her father chiming in occasionally with gruff observations about the weather. When they hung up, Maya felt the familiar ache of missing them mixed with relief at the distance. That night, unable to sleep, Maya walked through her neighborhood. The streets were quiet, most people tucked inside with family and friends. Christmas lights glowed in windows, reflecting off snow that had accumulated over the past week. The bodega was closed, its green awning now decorated with a string of colored bulbs. She walked to Central Park, entered at 81st Street, followed the path toward the reservoir. The park was beautiful in winter, skeletal trees dusted with snow, the city lights reflecting off the frozen water. A few other people wandered the paths, refugees from holiday gatherings or lonely souls seeking solace in the landscape. Maya stood at the edge of the reservoir, looking out across the frozen expanse. Somewhere on the other side, the buildings of Fifth Avenue rose like monuments to wealth. In her previous life, she'd looked at those buildings with a mixture of envy and resignation. They represented a world she'd never access, a life she'd never afford. Now she looked at them and thought, maybe not Fifth Avenue, but something solid and permanent and hers. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Maya turned to find an elderly man standing a few feet away. He wore a long wool coat and a scarf wrapped several times around his neck. His face was weathered, kind. "Very," Maya agreed. "I've been coming to this park for 40 years, he said. "Watched the city change around it. But this," he gestured at the reservoir, the trees, the silence, "this stays the same." Do you think that's good? Things staying the same? He considered. Good and bad, change is necessary, but so is permanence. You need both to make a life worth living. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then the man tipped his hat and continued down the path, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts. Change and permanence. She was trying to change her financial future while keeping the permanence of her apartment. Was that possible? Could you have both? Maya thought about the buyout offer. $75,000 to give up permanence for change. In her previous life, she'd taken that deal and spent the next 25 years regretting it. This time, she was betting on permanence, on the idea that holding on to something valuable was worth more than the immediate gratification of cash in hand. She walked home slowly, savoring the cold air and quiet streets. When she reached her building, she stood outside for a moment, looking up at the fourth-floor window. Her window. The light was off, but she could picture the interior exactly. Every crack in the plaster, every stain on the floor, every quirk and imperfection. Home. January arrived with a cold snap that made the previous month's weather seem tropical by comparison. Maya started her new job at Diane's consulting firm on the second Monday of the month. The office was smaller than she'd expected, just 2 rooms in a building on 42nd Street near Grand Central. One room held 2 desks, filing cabinets, and a conference table. The other was a kitchenette barely large enough for a coffee maker and a mini fridge. "It's not much," Diane said, "but it's ours." Ours. Maya liked the sound of that. Their first client, the tech entrepreneur Diane had mentioned, they was named Robert Chen. No relation to Maya, though the coincidence made them both smile during their initial meeting. Robert had sold a small software company for $3 million and had no idea what to do with the money. "I'm a coder, not a finance guy," he said, spreading his hands helplessly. "I just wrote good software at the right time. Now I have more money than I ever thought I'd see, and I'm terrified of screwing it up." Maya studied him across the conference table. He was younger than she'd expected. Early 30s, with the kind of casual dress that would become ubiquitous in tech, but still looked sloppy in the buttoned-up world of 1990s finance. "What are your goals?" she asked. "Goals? For the money. Do you want to preserve it? Grow it? Fund another venture?" Robert thought about this. "All of the above? I want to be smart about it, but I also want to take some risks. I didn't get here by playing it safe." Maya felt Diane watching her, testing to see how she'd handle this. In her previous life, Maya would have recommended a conservative portfolio, mostly bonds, some blue-chip stocks, minimal risk, safe, sensible, boring. But that was the old Maya, the one who'd lived a safe, sensible, boring financial life, and ended up with nothing to show for it. "Here's what I'd recommend," Maya said, pulling out a notepad. "We diversify, but we do it strategically. Conservative foundation, bonds, established companies, real estate, but we also allocate a portion for higher risk, higher reward investments, tech stocks, emerging markets, companies with solid fundamentals but room for growth." "How much in the high risk category?" 20 to 30%. Enough to potentially generate significant returns, but not enough to devastate your overall portfolio if things go south. Robert leaned back in his chair. "I like it. What kind of tech stocks are we talking about?" Maya glanced at Diane, who nodded slightly. This was Maya's call. Microsoft is solid. They just released Windows 95, and while the stock hasn't exploded yet, they're positioning themselves to dominate the OS market. Amazon is interesting. They just launched, they're losing money, but their business model is sound. Long-term play, definitely risky. Amazon? Robert frowned. The online bookstore? The online everything store, eventually. Books are just the beginning. You sound very confident about that? Maya met his eyes. I am. By the end of the meeting, Robert had signed on. $3 million under management, with Maya as the lead analyst, her first major client. After he left, Diane poured them both coffee from the ancient coffee maker. "That was impressive," she said. "Where did you learn to read people like that?" "Practice," Maya said, which wasn't quite a lie. "Well, keep practicing, because if you can land clients like that and deliver returns, we're going to be very successful." Over the next 2 months, Maya worked harder than she'd worked in her previous life. She analyzed markets, researched companies, built portfolios tailored to each client's risk tolerance and goals. She made recommendations based on knowledge she shouldn't have had, which companies would thrive, which would fail, where the market was headed. And she was right. Not every time. That would have been suspicious, but enough that her clients started seeing real returns. By March, the firm had 5 clients under management. By May, 12. Word spread that Diane's new hire had an uncanny ability to pick winners. Maya's own portfolio grew alongside her clients. She'd kept some of her Netscape shares, watched them climb above 160. She'd bought Amazon at $18 per share, ignoring everyone who said online bookstores made no sense. She'd invested in Microsoft, in Cisco, in companies she knew would be massive. Her $32,000 had become $60,000, then $80,000. In June, the letter arrived. Maya stared at the envelope, her hands shaking. It was from the building's management company, and she knew what it contained before opening it. Inside, notice of intent to convert to cooperative ownership. The building was going co-op. Tenants had insider purchase rights, the opportunity to buy their apartments at a discounted price before units went to market. Maya's apartment, according to the letter, had an insider purchase price of $85,000. She could barely breathe. $85,000. She had just over $80,000 in her portfolio. If she liquidated everything, pulled out all her investments, she could almost afford the down payment. But she'd need a mortgage for the rest. And mortgages required proof of income, job stability, credit history. Maya spread the paperwork across her kitchen table. Insider purchase agreement, financing options, timeline. Tenants had 90 days to decide whether to buy, 90 days to secure a mortgage, come up with a down payment, commit to being a homeowner instead of a renter. In her previous life, this had felt impossible. $85,000 might as well have been $85 million. She'd taken the buyout instead, convinced herself she was making the smart choice. Now, looking at her portfolio statements and pay stubs from the consulting firm, it still felt almost impossible. But almost wasn't the same as entirely. The next morning, Maya walked into a bank on Broadway and asked to speak with a mortgage officer. The woman who greeted her looked skeptical from the moment Maya sat down. Her nameplate read, Judith Hernandez, and her expression suggested she'd heard every sob story and over-optimistic projection imaginable. "I'd like to apply for a co-op mortgage," Maya said. "What's your annual income?" $35,000. What plus commission? Maya had started taking a percentage of the returns she generated for clients. Diane's idea meant to incentivize performance. "And you're looking to borrow how much?" "Approximately $60,000. I have about $25,000 for the down payment." She was lying slightly. She had more than that, but she needed to keep some liquid assets. Judith Hernandez typed numbers into her computer, her expression growing more skeptical with each keystroke. "Miss Chen, on your current income, the maximum loan amount we could approve would be around $90,000, but that's assuming perfect credit, no outstanding debts, and a substantial down payment. I have good credit, and I can put down 30%. The typing continued. Then, you also have student loan debt of approximately $40,000. Maya's stomach sank. She'd forgotten about the student loans. In her previous life, she'd paid them off slowly over 15 years. In this life, she'd been so focused on investing that she'd only made minimum payments. That debt-to-income ratio is going to be a problem, Judith said. The bank typically wants to see a ratio below 43%. With your student loans and the proposed mortgage payment, you'd be well above that. What if I paid down the student loans first? That would help, but you'd need to pay off at least $20,000 to get your ratio into acceptable range. $20,000. Maya did the math quickly. If she pulled $20,000 from her portfolio to pay down debt, she'd have $60,000 left. Not enough for both the down payment and closing costs. What about a co-signer? Maya asked. Do you have someone who could co-sign? Someone with good credit and stable income? Her parents. In her previous life, they'd offered to help with student loans, but Maya had been too proud to accept. Now pride seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. I might, Maya said. Well, that would definitely improve your application. If you can find a co-signer and pay down some of your student loan debt, come back and we'll reassess. Maya left the bank feeling deflated. She'd been so focused on the portfolio, on growing her investments, that she'd ignored the fundamentals. Debt mattered. Income mattered. The math had to work on paper, not just in her head. That evening, she called her parents. "Sweetie!" Her mother's voice was bright with surprise. "Oh, we were just talking about you." "Good things, I hope." "Always good things? Your father was saying we should fly out and visit. Maybe next month?" I'd like that. Maya took a breath. Mom, I need to ask you something. It's about money. Silence on the other end. Then her father's voice, having picked up the extension. What kind of money? I have a chance to buy my apartment. The building's going co-op and tenants get insider purchase rights, but I need help with the financing. How much help? Her father's tone was cautious. He'd been a school teacher for 30 years, retired now on a pension that was comfortable, but not generous. I need to pay down my student loans to qualify for the mortgage. About $20,000. Another silence. Maya could picture them looking at each other, having the conversation couples had with their eyes alone. That's a lot of money, Maya, her mother said finally. I know, and I wouldn't ask if I wasn't sure this was the right move. But Mom, Dad, if I don't buy this apartment now, I'll never be able to afford to live in Manhattan again. Property values are only going up. This is my chance to build equity, to invest in my future. She sounds like a real estate agent, her father said, not entirely joking. I sound like someone who's done her research. More silence. Then her father said, let us think about it. We need to check our finances, see what we can do. Of course, thank you for considering it. After hanging up, Maya sat in the dark apartment, listening to the sounds of the building. The couple in 4B arguing, the college student upstairs playing music, the baby in 3B crying. These sounds, these neighbors, this life. She'd taken it for granted the first time around. Not again. 2 weeks later, Maya's parents called back. We can do it, her father said without preamble. 20,000. But there are conditions. What conditions? First, you pay us back. We're not giving you this money. We're lending it. We'll draw up a formal agreement, set up a payment plan. Okay? Second, if you're going to buy this apartment, you're going to take care of it. No letting it fall apart because you're too busy with work. You maintain it, improve it, treat it like the investment it is. I will. Third, her father's voice softened. You come visit us more often. Your mother misses you? Maya felt tears prick her eyes. I miss you too. The money came through in early August. Maya immediately paid down her student loans, bringing her debt-to-income ratio into acceptable range. Then she went back to the bank. Judith Hernandez looked less skeptical this time. Your financial picture has improved significantly, she said, reviewing Maya's updated information. And you said you can put down 30%? $25,000. With your improved debt ratio and that down payment, I think we can make this work. Let me run the numbers. She typed, clicked, frowned at the screen, typed some more. All right, Judith said finally. The bank is willing to offer you a mortgage of $60,000 at 8.3% interest. Your monthly payment would be approximately $490. $490. Less than what she'd pay in rent if she didn't buy. Oh, and she'd be building equity instead of throwing money away to a landlord. I'll take it, Maya said. The closing happened on a Thursday in September, exactly 1 year after Maya had woken up in her apartment to find herself 28 again. She sat in a conference room at the management company's office, surrounded by lawyers and real estate agents, and people in suits who shuffled papers and pointed to signature lines. Maya signed her name so many times it stopped looking like language. She wrote a check for $25,000 with shaking hands. She listened to people explain escrow and title insurance and co-op board requirements. And then it was done. The apartment was hers. Walking home, to her home, her property, Maya felt like she was floating. The September air was warm, the city alive with end-of-summer energy. She stopped at the bodega, bought a cheap bottle of champagne. Carlos raised an eyebrow. Celebrating something. I just bought my apartment. His face split into a huge grin. No kidding. Maya, that's fantastic. He reached across the counter, shook her hand with genuine enthusiasm. Your family's been in this neighborhood how long? Just me, about 5 years now. Well, now you're really part of it. You're not just living here anymore. You belong here. Maya carried the champagne upstairs, let herself into the apartment with a key that felt heavier than before, weighted with meaning. She looked around at the familiar space, seeing it differently now. Hers. Not a rental, not temporary. Hers. She opened the champagne, poured herself a glass in a mug because she didn't own champagne flutes. She toasted the water-stained ceiling, the scuffed floors, the radiator that clanged like a percussion instrument. To second chances, she said aloud. The next 5 years passed faster than Maya expected and slower than she remembered. She continued working for Diane's consulting firm, which grew from 2 employees to 8, from 12 clients to 47. Maya became a partner in 1998, her 5% equity stake increasing to 15% as the firm expanded. Her portfolio, carefully managed and regularly rebalanced, grew steadily. She'd sold her Amazon shares before the dot-com crash, bought them back when the price tanked, held them as the company slowly rebuilt. She'd done the same with other tech stocks, getting in early, getting out before the bubble burst, getting back in when others panicked. By the time September 11th happened, Maya had nearly $400,000 in assets. She watched the towers fall from her office window on 42nd Street, watched smoke billow across the Manhattan skyline, watched the world change in the span of a single morning. For 3 days, she couldn't work, couldn't do anything but watch the news and cry and try to reconcile the disaster she remembered from her previous life with the fresh horror of experiencing it again. Diane found her in the office late one night, staring at a blank computer screen. "Go home," Diane said gently. "There's nothing we can do here." "I keep thinking I should have warned people," Maya said. "I should have done something." Diane sat down beside her. "Warned them how? You didn't know this was going to happen." But she had known, or at least some part of her had remembered. Yeah, not the details. She'd never known those even in her previous life, but the fact of it, the shape of that terrible day. And she'd done nothing? "Come on," Diane said. "Let's get you home." Maya walked back to her apartment through streets that were covered in dust, past people wearing masks and crying and walking north because all the subways had stopped. She climbed the 4 flights to her apartment, let herself in, collapsed on her couch. The apartment wrapped around her like a cocoon. Safe, familiar, permanent. She'd made the right choice, keeping this place. In the days and weeks after the attacks, when the city felt like it might collapse under the weight of grief and fear, having this anchor, this home that belonged to her completely, made all the difference. In 2005, Maya's apartment was appraised at $450,000. She was 38 years old. She owned property in Manhattan worth nearly $500,000. Her portfolio had recovered from the post-9/11 dip and was worth over $600,000. The consulting firm was doing well enough that her annual income had reached $120,000. By any reasonable metric, she was successful. And yet, sitting in her apartment on a Wednesday evening in March, Maya felt a strange emptiness. She'd achieved everything she'd set out to do, kept the apartment, built wealth, avoided the financial mistakes of her previous life. But what else had she done? In her previous life, she'd dated, fallen in love, had her heart broken multiple times. She'd traveled, made friends, joined a book club, taken pottery classes. I lived a life that was messy and complicated and full. In this life, she'd been so focused on the financial that she'd neglected almost everything else. She'd gone on a few dates, cautious, brief affairs that fizzled out when men realized she was more interested in her portfolio than in them. She'd lost touch with Rachel, who'd moved to Seattle and started a family. She'd turned down invitations because she was working late, saving money, planning for a future that was always just around the corner. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Maya Chen?" An unfamiliar voice, male, professional. "Speaking." "This is David Morrison from Caldwell Investments. I got your name from Robert Chen. You've been managing his portfolio for about 10 years now." "That's right. He speaks very highly of you. Says you have an uncanny ability to anticipate market movements. I'm calling because we're looking for senior analysts, and I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you." Maya listened as David Morrison described a position at one of the most prestigious investment firms in New York, a significant salary increase, better benefits, a chance to work with high-net-worth clients to make decisions that moved markets. "I'm flattered," Maya said when he finished, "but I'm happy where I am. At least hear the full offer. Can we meet for coffee next week?" Maya almost said no, almost protected the careful, safe life she'd built, but something in her rebelled against that impulse. "Sure," she said. "Coffee next week." They met at a Starbucks near Bryant Park. David Morrison was older than she'd expected, mid-50s, silver-haired, while wearing a suit that probably cost more than Maya's monthly mortgage payment. "I'll be direct," he said after they'd sat down. "We want to poach you. You've built a reputation in a very short time, and we think you'd be a valuable addition to our team." "What kind of salary are we talking about?" Base of $200,000 plus bonuses based on performance. Could easily be $300,000 in a good year. $300,000. Maya sipped her coffee to hide her reaction. And what would I be doing? Managing portfolios for ultra-high net worth individuals, people with 10, 20, 50 million to invest. You'd have a team working under you, but the final decisions would be yours. It was tempting. More than tempting. This was the kind of position that could set her up for life, that could turn her comfortable success into genuine wealth. But it would also mean leaving Diane, leaving the firm they'd built together, leaving her 15% equity stake in a company that was growing steadily. I need to think about it, Maya said. Of course. Take your time. David Morrison pulled out a business card, slid it across the table. But Maya, opportunities like this don't come around often. Think carefully before you say no. That night, Maya called Diane. I got offered a job, she said, at Caldwell. Silence on the other end. Then, when? Today. They want me to manage high net worth portfolios. The salary it's substantial. I bet it is. Diane's voice was neutral, carefully controlled. Are you going to take it? I don't know. That's why I'm calling you. You want my permission? I want your advice. Diane was quiet for a long moment. Maya could hear traffic in the background. Diane was probably walking home from the office, still working at 7 p.m. like she always did. Here's my advice, Diane said finally. You've built something here, Maya. Not just a job, but equity. A stake in something that's yours. If you go to Caldwell, you'll make more money, sure. But you'll be working for someone else again, building their company instead of yours. Ours? Maya corrected. Ours, Diane agreed. So the question is, do you want to be rich working for someone else or wealthy building something of your own? After hanging up, Maya sat in her apartment thinking. Her apartment. Which had appreciated from $85,000 to $450,000 in 10 years, an increase of over 400%, and she'd almost walked away from it for $50,000. The consulting firm was the same principle, scaled larger. She owned 15% of something valuable that was growing more valuable every year. If she stayed, if she kept building, that equity would compound. If she left for a bigger salary, she'd be trading long-term wealth for short-term income. She'd already made that mistake once. Maya called David Morrison the next morning. I'm honored by the offer, she said, but I'm going to stay where I am. He didn't sound surprised. I thought you might say that, but if you change your mind, the offer stands. Thank you. I appreciate it. One more thing, Maya. If you're ever looking for investors, if your firm wants to expand, call me. We're always interested in promising ventures. After hanging up, Maya felt something shift inside her. Not regret, but recognition. She'd chosen long-term value over short-term gain. She'd bet on herself instead of settling for security, just like she'd done with the apartment. The financial crisis of 2008 was different the second time around. In her previous life, Maya had watched from the sidelines as the economy collapsed. She'd lost her job, burned through savings, struggled to find work in a market where everyone was struggling. This time, she saw it coming. She'd started pulling her clients out of mortgage-backed securities in 2007, much to their confusion. She'd moved portfolios into cash and conservative bonds, ignoring the protest that she was being too cautious. When Lehman Brothers collapsed in September 2008, Maya's clients were insulated. Not untouched. Nobody was untouched by a crisis that large, but protected. Her own portfolio, which had grown to nearly $1 million, was similarly sheltered. She'd kept some equity positions, but nothing catastrophic. And when the market bottomed out in March 2009, she started buying. Real estate, especially. Properties that had been worth millions were selling for pennies on the dollar. Maya bought a 2-bedroom in Brooklyn for $120,000. She bought shares in a REIT that owned commercial property. She bought stock in banks that everyone swore would never recover. By 2010, when the market started its slow recovery, Maya's net worth had grown to $1.3 million. Her apartment, the one she'd bought for $85,000 in 1996, was appraised at $750,000. Exactly the number she remembered from her previous life. Maya stood in her living room looking at the appraisal document and started laughing. It was the same laugh that had erupted when she'd made her first profit on Netscape, uncontrolled, slightly hysterical, full of wonder and relief and triumph. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. More than that, she'd exceeded it. In her previous life, this apartment had been worth $750,000, but she hadn't owned it. Now she owned it outright, mortgage paid off 2 years early because she'd been making extra payments whenever possible. Oh, $750,000 in equity, plus the Brooklyn property, plus her portfolio, plus her stake in the consulting firm. She was 43 years old, and she was worth over $2 million. The spring of 2012 brought changes Maya hadn't anticipated. Diane announced she wanted to retire. Not completely, she'd still consult, still advise, but she wanted to step back from day-to-day operations. "I'm 62, she said over lunch at a restaurant in Midtown. "I've been doing this for 40 years. I want to travel, spend time with my grandchildren, sleep past 6 in the morning." Maya nodded, understanding, but also panicking slightly. "What does this mean for the firm?" "It means you buy me out. We've been partners for 17 years. You know this business as well as I do. Better, in some ways. It's time for it to be fully yours." "I can't afford to buy you out," Diane smiled. "You can't afford not to. We have over 100 clients now, nearly 200 million under management. The firm's value has increased substantially." They'd had the firm appraised a year earlier, part of routine financial planning. The valuation had come back at $8 million. Diane owned 55%. Maya owned 15%. The remaining 30% was split between other senior analysts. 55% of $8 million was $4.4 million. "I don't have $4 million, Maya said flatly. "You don't need $4 million. You need a business loan and a payment plan." Diane pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. "I've already talked to the bank. They're willing to finance your buyout at favorable terms. You'd pay me over 10 years with interest, but the firm's growth should more than cover the payments." Maya opened the folder, scanned the documents inside. The numbers were dizzying. Loan amounts, payment schedules, projections. But Diane was right. The firm generated enough revenue that buying her out, while leveraged, was feasible. "Why are you doing this?" Maya asked. "You could sell to someone else, an outside firm, probably for more money." "I could," Diane agreed, "but I built this company from nothing. I don't want to see it absorbed by some corporate entity that doesn't understand what we do. I want it to continue, to grow, to maintain the culture we've created. And I trust you to do that." Trust. Maya felt the weight of that word. "Okay," she said. Let's do it." The buyout took 6 months to finalize. Lawyers, accountants, bankers, everyone had opinions and requirements. But in December 2012, Maya signed the final papers. She now owned 70% of a firm worth $8 million. She had a loan payment of $40,000 per month for the next 10 years. And she was terrified. "Welcome to the big leagues," her accountant said, not entirely joking. Maya went home to her apartment, still the same apartment, still the 4th floor walk up on West 82nd Street, and looked around at space that suddenly felt too small for who she'd become. She could move, could buy something bigger, fancier, more befitting a woman worth over $5 million, a penthouse with a doorman and Central Park views. But this was home. The radiator still clanged, the floors were still scuffed. The ceiling still had water stains, and she loved it exactly as it was. By 2015, Maya had paid off half of Diane's buyout. The firm, now called Chen Investments, though Maya had resisted changing the name, was managing over $300 million in assets. She'd hired 10 new analysts, moved to a larger office, been featured in Forbes as one of the top women in finance. She was 48 years old and living a life she'd barely imagined in her previous timeline. But success brought its own complications. Men her age wanted to date her now, accomplished, wealthy men who saw her net worth as an asset rather than a threat. But they bored her. They talked about golf and their ex-wives and their vintage car collections. They expected her to be impressed by their success while being threatened by hers. So women her age, the few she still knew from the old days, looked at her with a mixture of admiration and resentment. Rachel, on a rare visit from Seattle, had toured Maya's office and said, "I guess some of us were meant for bigger things." "It's not like that," Maya had protested. "Isn't it? You're running a multi-million-dollar firm. I'm a stay-at-home mom in the suburbs. We chose different paths. Both paths are valid." Rachel had smiled, but it hadn't reached her eyes. "If you say so." They'd lost touch again after that visit. Some friendships Maya realized couldn't survive the passage of time and divergence of circumstances. It was sad, but it was also natural. People grew apart. Lives moved in different directions. What Maya hadn't expected was the loneliness. She had colleagues, clients, professional acquaintances. But friends? Real friends, the kind you called at midnight when everything felt impossible? She had no one. Work filled the void. There was always another client, another portfolio, another deal. Maya buried herself in it, let the numbers and strategies consume her attention, until the day her chest started hurting. It was subtle at first, a tightness, a pressure. Maya ignored it, blamed it on stress. But during a meeting with a major client, the pain became sharp, urgent. "Are you okay?" the client asked. "You look pale." "I'm fine," Maya said, but she wasn't. Her assistant called an ambulance. Maya protested the entire way to the hospital, insisting it was nothing. She just needed to rest. The doctors ran tests, EKG, blood work, chest x-ray. "Your heart's fine," the ER doctor said finally. "This was a panic attack?" "I don't have panic attacks." "You do now. Have you been under unusual stress lately?" Unusual stress. Maya almost laughed. She was running a $300 million firm, managing the money of some of the wealthiest people in New York, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. "Some stress," she admitted. "You need to make changes. Reduce your workload, practice stress management, consider therapy. Your body is telling you something. Listen to it." Maya went home that night, looked around her apartment, the same apartment she'd fought so hard to keep, and felt the walls closing in. She'd won. She'd gotten everything she'd wanted, the apartment, the wealth, the success. So why did she feel so empty? The therapist's office was on the Upper East Side, in a building that smelled like lavender and old money. Dr. Sarah Kim was in her 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that made Maya want to cry the moment she sat down. "What brings you here today?" Dr. Kim asked. Maya had prepared an answer. Something about stress management, about learning to handle pressure better. But what came out was, "I'm living my life for the second time, and I'm afraid I'm getting it wrong again." Dr. Kim's expression didn't change. "Tell me more about that." So Maya told her, not the literal truth. She couldn't explain that she'd actually lived 25 extra years and been sent back, but she talked about feeling like she'd wasted her first attempt at life, about getting a second chance and being terrified of wasting that too. "What did you waste?" Dr. Kim asked. "Opportunities. Time. I focused on the wrong things. Security over growth, safety over risk. I played it small when I should have played it big. And now? Now I'm playing it big. Maybe too big. I've built this company, accumulated all this wealth. I thought that would make me happy, but it doesn't." "What would make you happy?" Maya stared at her hands. They looked older than she felt. 48 years of aging she couldn't quite reconcile with the 28-year-old she still sometimes felt like. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I did. I thought financial security would solve everything, but I've achieved that, and I'm still empty." "It sounds like you've been very focused on external validation, wealth, success, achievement. Have you spent any time thinking about internal validation? What makes you feel fulfilled? Oh, rather than successful?" Maya went to therapy every week for the next year. She talked about her parents, about her regrets, about the relationships she'd let slip away in pursuit of financial goals. She talked about Rachel, about the disconnect she felt from people her own age who didn't share her obsession with building wealth. She talked about being afraid to want things beyond money, love, connection, purpose, because those things couldn't be controlled or predicted like markets could. "You've spent 15 years trying to control your future," Dr. Kim said during one session. "Maybe it's time to let yourself be present in your actual life." Present, Maya had forgotten what that meant. She'd been so focused on the timeline. What came next, what she needed to prepare for, that she'd stopped experiencing the moment she was in. And after that session, Maya made changes. She hired a CEO to run the day-to-day operations of the firm. She remained chairman and primary strategist, but she delegated the management headaches to someone who actually enjoyed that work. She started taking weekends off, real weekends where she didn't check email or review portfolios. She joined a book club, not a professional networking group disguised as a book club, but an actual book club full of women who just wanted to discuss literature and drink wine. She started dating. Not to find a husband or a partner, she'd long since accepted that might not happen, but to meet interesting people and have interesting conversations. She flew to California to visit her parents. Her father was 78 now, her mother 75. They were slowing down, moving more carefully through the world. Then Maya spent a week with them, helping her mother in the garden, listening to her father's stories about teaching. "We're proud of you," her mother said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "For the money? For the life you've built. You took risks. You believed in yourself. That takes courage." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "I made a lot of mistakes." "Everyone does. The trick is learning from them." Her mother squeezed her hand. "You've learned well, sweetie." In 2020, the pandemic hit. Maya was 53 years old, exactly the age she'd been when she died in her previous life. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. She sheltered in place in her apartment, the same apartment she'd bought 24 years earlier. The city shut down around her. Sirens wailed constantly, and refrigerated trucks lined the streets outside hospitals. It was terrifying and familiar and completely different from anything she'd experienced before. Maya had money this time, security. She could have left the city, fled to somewhere safer, but she stayed, contributing to food banks and medical supplies, using her wealth to help where she could. The firm survived, largely because they'd been conservative with investments, had emergency funds, had learned from the 2008 crisis to prepare for the unexpected. Maya's clients panicked, wanted to sell everything. She talked them down one by one, explaining that panic selling was how you locked in losses. "Trust me," she said during countless video calls. "I've lived through this before." Not literally, of course, but close enough by the time the vaccine arrived in 2021. Then Maya had made it past the age she'd died in her previous timeline. Every day after felt like a gift, like borrowed time she was determined not to waste. She was 54 years old. She was worth over $10 million. She owned her apartment outright, owned a controlling stake in a successful firm, had investments across multiple sectors. By every financial metric, she'd won. But winning, Maya had learned, wasn't the same as living. On a Tuesday in September 2025, Maya walked through her neighborhood. She was 58 years old, her hair streaked with silver that she'd stopped dyeing 2 years earlier. Her apartment, the same fourth-floor walk-up she'd bought in 1996, was worth over $2 million now. The neighborhood had changed and stayed the same. The bodega with the green awning was gone, replaced by an artisanal coffee shop. Mrs. Kowalski's newsstand had been replaced by a juice bar. The buildings were cleaner, the streets safer, the whole area gentrified almost beyond recognition. But the bones remained. The same brownstones, the same fire escapes, the same essential character that had made Maya fight to stay all those years ago. She stopped at the corner of 82nd and Broadway, looked up at her building. From the street, it looked like any other pre-war apartment building in Manhattan. But Maya knew every crack in the facade, every quirk of the plumbing, every sound the radiators made. A young couple walked past, arguing about rent prices. "We can't afford to stay here," the woman said. "We should take the buyout." "But this neighborhood will still be here without us in it." Maya wanted to stop them, to tell them to fight for it, to explain that giving up rent-stabilized housing in Manhattan was a mistake they'd regret for the rest of their lives. But she didn't, because maybe for them, it wasn't a mistake. Maybe their path was different. Maybe they needed to leave to find what mattered to them, just like Maya had needed to stay. She climbed the 4 flights to her apartment, let herself in. The space felt like an old friend. Comfortable, familiar, full of memories accumulated over 30 years. Maya had offers to sell, of course. Developers wanted the building. They'd offered $3 million for her 2-bedroom apartment, $3 million for something she'd bought for $85,000. But she'd said no. Some things weren't about the money. Some things were about belonging, about roots, and about having a place that was yours completely. Maya walked to the window, looked out at the fire escape, the brick wall of the building next door, the familiar view that had greeted her for 3 decades. In another timeline, she'd taken $50,000 and walked away from this. In this timeline, she'd fought to keep it. And she'd been right, not just financially, though that was part of it, but right in a deeper way. A way that had to do with knowing yourself well enough to understand what you couldn't afford to lose. The phone rang. Maya smiled. It was probably one of her book club friends. calling to gossip about the latest selection. Or maybe her assistant, confirming tomorrow's schedule, or possibly one of her clients, panicking about market volatility and needing reassurance. She'd answer in a moment. But first, she stood at the window, looking out at the city that had been her home for over 30 years, feeling the solid floor beneath her feet, breathing air that smelled like radiator heat and old coffee. Life unfolded like wind through seasons, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, always moving forward. You couldn't control it, couldn't predict all its twists and turns, but you could choose where you stood. You could plant yourself firmly in one spot and say, "This is mine, this matters, I'm not moving." Maya had made that choice 30 years ago, and she'd make it again tomorrow and every day after, for as long as she drew breath. The radiator clanged its familiar song. The city hummed outside her window. The phone kept ringing. Maya Chen was home, and home was exactly where she belonged.